Welcome, it is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel as we try to build this thing up. Green Bay Packers General Manager Brian Gutekunst speaking to reporters earlier on Wednesday, kind of giving an instant reaction to that, breaking down what he said. We can give you sort of the Cliff Notes version here if you missed it, some things that certainly stood out. A lot of it was, we hear like with head coaches when they have coach speak, like they say what you would expect them to. There was some of that with Goody, but I do believe there were a lot of very interesting things he noted as well. We're going to bounce around with this too, kind of topic to topic, position to position, player by player, so on and so forth. Not necessarily in the order that Goody went, because in my own notes that I took with some of his quotes, I really bounced around. The overall theme was very, very clear, at least in my opinion, with what Goody said. And he didn't say it directly in this fashion, but how he answered certain questions about personnel made it abundantly obvious. Green Bay is going to run it back. Whether you like it, whether I like it, doesn't matter. The Packers are going to run it back. And what I mean by that is a lot of these players that are under contract next year, and some of them that maybe you don't want back in the fold, sure sounds like they will be back in the mix. Same goes for the staff. And I know there was already a lot of staff turnover. Jeff Hafley leaves to take the head coaching job. John Eric Sullivan takes over as the GM, both in Miami now. And Hafley, I don't know if I'd say he gutted the defensive staff for Green Bay, but he certainly took a handful of the members of that defensive staff with him to Miami. So Green Bay already had to replace a lot. But certainly there are skeptics and doubters that exist for Adam Stenavich, for Butkus. Obviously, there's a lot of people that have voiced their opinions about Rich Bisaccia the last couple of seasons. And Goody addressed a lot of that and specific players on the roster. I know a lot of people want Nate Hobbs gone, Keyshawn Nixon, Rashawn Gary, list goes on and on and on. And I think that kind of... It's not surprising when a team like Green Bay, you're 9-3-1, and all of a sudden your world comes crashing down and you lose 5 straight games to end the season. You're 9-3-1, and Micah Parsons tears his ACL against Denver, and you lose that game and you don't win the rest of the season. So obviously there's going to be a lot of frustration when the expectation was, it wasn't Super Bowl or bust, but it was, this is a team that should compete for a Super Bowl, and all of a sudden here they are again as the 7th seed in the postseason, and they're a one and done. Now, Goody did say, when he was asked about the Packers roster, he said, and I quote, "Losing 5 games in a row, I don't know that we've made a decision on anybody yet." And when asked if he thought Green Bay was sort of on the same level as New England and Seattle, both of whom are obviously playing in the Super Bowl on Sunday, Goody said, I quote, "Not the last 5 games. I mean, certainly not. That's hard to say, but I felt through the year we could compete with anyone, and we proved that throughout the season. We just didn't evolve into the team we needed to be." And so I thought in those 2 answers, he was pretty forthright in that, Green Bay didn't finish the season obviously how it wanted to, but obviously saying as well, because of that, you can't necessarily say they're on the same, standing as New England and Seattle, both of whom are the last 2 teams standing, although he felt differently throughout the season, and I think a lot of people did, especially midway through that Denver game when Green Bay was 9-3-1 and winning by 2 possessions with the ball in the third quarter against the Broncos. The interesting thing where he said that he doesn't know that they've made any decision about anybody on the roster yet, but then he was asked about specific players. It sure sounds like Rashawn Gary's going to be back. Goody, and I'm slightly paraphrasing here, when he was asked specifically about Rashawn Gary, he had mentioned that Rashawn Gary's under contract through next year, so certainly the expectation would be that he is back. And then he said, and I quote, "I thought he started out really strong. Obviously, he had a lot of production early. I think he ended up with 60-some pressures and 7.5 sacks. That's pretty good production in the NFL." He did mention the second half of the season for Rashawn Gary wasn't as star-spangled awesome as the first half, and quite frankly, I think the more alarming thing, you can look statistically at Rashawn Gary's second half of the season where he went, was it the last 9-10 weeks without a sack or a tackle for loss? Didn't get one in either department, which is crazy. And he gave an inspiring, motivational talk after Micah Parsons suffered that torn ACL against Denver, and then it was anyone else except Rashawn Gary stepping up on the defensive line for Green Bay after the Parsons injury. And the stats for Rashawn Gary didn't just dip off after Parsons' season came to an end. It had already started to spiral for Rashawn Gary. And I think more than just the statistics, the eye test was kind of alarming. He looked slow to the punch. He looked slow in pursuit. You watch some of these rollouts from Bo Nix, from Caleb Williams in those games where Green Bay was facing more mobile quarterbacks, and Rashawn Gary just looked extreme. He looked like a shell of himself. Don't know if that's just life as it is post that torn ACL from a couple years ago or not, but the explosiveness was like severely lacking to a point where I wondered aloud, like, is he dealing with an injury that just is kind of being swept under the rug for now and it'll be dealt with in the offseason? Goody didn't say anything about an injury for Rashawn Gary, but to bring him back at the number and the hit he would have on the salary cap next year, I don't want to go as far as to say it'd be like organizational malpractice, but I believe the number is around $20 million if they just don't touch Rashawn Gary's contract for next year. And I don't know, based off the production or lack thereof, and Spotrac says his cap hit next year would be north of $25 million, just the cap hit. And his base salary is $18 million. I don't know how you justify bringing him back on that. So maybe Goody's saying that he expects Rashawn Gary back. Like, obviously he's not going to say, no, he's gone. And so you have to take a lot of these questions about the roster with specific players in mind with a grain of salt, because Goody's not going to show his hand. At least in its entirety, he's not going to show his hand. But he could also hedge a little bit. And like when he said, we lost 5 games in a row, I don't know that we've made a decision on anyone yet. But then he's asked about Rashawn, and he says, yeah, I fully expect him back. And then he mentions the first half of the season he had. I don't know how you can bring him back at that number. And so maybe Goody has a hunch that they can restructure something with Rashawn. But even at that point, the production was so bad, and he was so invisible down the stretch run of the season, and he looked so slow. I would heavily caution, I'd be completely against bringing him back at his current number for his contract. And far be it for me or anyone to go, I'm not trying to go, digging into the pockets of others, but from an organizational standpoint, I don't know how you bring Rashawn Gary. I don't know how you look at what he did to finish the season and say, yep, don't touch the contract, just bring him back, especially when Green Bay has these significant investments in Jordan Love and Micah Parsons, and you're already going to be trying to wiggle around to try to find avenues to explore in free agency when you're kind of pushed up against it financially. Restructuring Rashawn and bringing him back, I think a lot of people would still be against it, but obviously I'd be more accepting of it than just not touching the contract at all and bringing him back, especially after the way he performed down the stretch. Cornerback play, that was a hotly contested topic throughout the season. I had said going into the year, I was a bit uneasy. I liked Keyshawn Nixon. I still like Keyshawn Nixon, but entering the year, like Keyshawn Nixon, do I like him as a CB1? I said in videos before the year started, no, I did not. And Green Bay was putting a lot of eggs into the basket of Jeff Hafley's defense, which didn't blitz a lot and doesn't blitz a lot. It's just not something schematically that he believes in. He wants to get pressure rushing for, and so they put a lot of eggs into that basket of let's get pressure on the quarterback rushing for. We now have the all-world player in Micah Parsons. It should make life easier for our secondary and easier for our cornerbacks, and that was true for a lot of the season until Micah Parsons went down, and then we saw a lot of things crumble with the defense, and a lot of that came on the back half in the secondary with names like Keyshawn Nixon and Carrington Valentine. Now, Goody was asked about the cornerback room, and he had mentioned, again, I'm slightly paraphrasing, said they'll need to add depth, I believe is what he said, but he raved about the season that Keyshawn Nixon had, said he had a very, very good season. He was top 3, I believe Goody said, in PBUs, said Carrington Valentine stepped up when Nate Hobbs went down, and he had a very good season. It's subjective, so everyone can have their own take on it. It's hard for me to view it through the prism of looking at what Keyshawn Nixon did. I can't sit here, and I'm not the general manager of the Packers. I'm not a scout. I'm not part of the organization, right? I'm just a fan with the microphone. But it is hard for me in my amateur eye to look at what I saw with Keyshawn Nixon. I can't sit here and tell you he had a very, very good season. I don't think he did. I thought he had a couple of good moments. The cherry on top of the Sunday moment was the interception of Caleb Williams to end the game at Lambeau Field when the Packers beat the Bears. But there were a lot more low moments with Keyshawn Nixon, I believe, than those high moments. And one thing I kept harping on is this cornerback room, not the secondary, because I think Xavier McKinney and Evan Williams can be classified as a ball hawk. Maybe you're stretching it a little bit with Evan Williams, but you could call them both that, and I don't think you'd get a lot of pushback. This cornerback room does not have a ball hawk, and takeaways were a big struggle with this defense. The cornerbacks hardly had any. Keyshawn Nixon had the interception against the Bears. I'm trying to think of another cornerback that had an interception this year. I guess I could look at it because I know McKinney had a couple, Evan Williams had a couple. But that was a huge problem for the Packers. Let's look at interceptions. Carrington Valentine had one too in the postseason. Carrington Valentine had on that fourth down. So regular season, Evan Williams had 3, Xavier McKinney had 2, McDuffie. Keyshawn Nixon was the only cornerback to have an interception for the Packers, and it was 1. And I had said, throughout the season, we need a ball hawk. You don't have to be an all-pro. I've said this multiple times. Sam Shield, Tremont Williams, Rasul Douglas were not all pros. Go look at their interception numbers in Green Bay, and then go look at the Packers cornerback room this year. There was 1 with Keyshawn Nixon, but they have Keyshawn Nixon, Carrington Valentine, and Nate Hobbs, who are expected to be your trio of cornerbacks atop the depth chart until Nate Hobbs, dealt with multiple injuries. None of those guys throughout their career have ever shown the ability to be a ball hawk or anything close to it. And so Goody says they need to have depth, but he raved about the play of Keyshawn Nixon and complimented the play of Carrington Valentine, which I guess is somewhat to be expected. He's not going to throw those guys under the bus. I'll be pissed. I don't know if it can come via free agency or the draft, because you have to remember they don't have a first-round pick. I'll be pretty ticked off if next season Green Bay has, Nixon, Valentine, and Hobbs as the top 3 again, and the depth that they've added is just on the back end with late-round draft picks. If you look at Green Bay's, I think it dates back to 2022. I talked about this in a video a month ago. The investment via the draft to the cornerback room has been invisible in recent years. So dating back to, give me a second here, I think it's 2022. It might be 2021. Dating back to 2022, folks, Green Bay has drafted 3 cornerbacks. All 3 have been in the 7th round. Carrington Valentine in 2023, Kalen King, who's not even on the team in 2024, Micah Robinson, who's not even on the team 2025. So since 2022, Green Bay has drafted 3 cornerbacks, all 3 in the 7th round. When he talks about adding depth, I hope it's to the top half of the depth chart and not just filler pieces on the back end. Because, yes, you'll get Micah Parsons back, and yes, Jonathan Gannon might rely on getting pressure on the quarterback and helping alleviate pressure on the cornerbacks, or what the workload that could be on their shoulders, maybe putting them in more advantageous spots. But if you run it back with that trio being your top 3 again, it's 3 players who just look at their stats throughout their careers. They don't pick the ball off. They're not ball hawks. They don't play that advantageous spot with that trait. They just don't possess it. And all 3, Hobbs mainly the injuries, but the other 2 had some pretty significant struggles, especially in the second half, especially when Parsons went down. I mean, the main gripe with Carrington Valentine was that he was allergic to tackling, and Keyshawn Nixon just with coverage breakdowns and some stupid boneheaded penalties, whether it was taunting or personal fouls, things of that nature. To me, if there's a position I'm really, really circling in on that I want to see addressed this offseason, you can bring back Nixon, bring back Hobbs, bring back Valentine. I'm fine with that. But I think they need an alpha in that room that is an alpha not with his voice, but an alpha with his play. Because Keyshawn Nixon can bark with the best of them. Nate Hobbs can bark with the best of them. Did they necessarily always back it up with their play? Not even close. And so I was a little kind of, the eyebrows getting raised a little bit when I heard the talk, the praise being so heavy for the year that Goody mentioned that Keyshawn Nixon had. It is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Always appreciative of all the support. Sounds like Rich Bisaccia will be back, special teams coordinator for the Green Bay Packers. There's been some fascinating articles that I have come across mentioning the lack of investment the Packers have made with their personnel in the special teams department in recent years. Goody had said directly at this press conference on Wednesday that he believes the special teams have been significantly better, those were his words, the last few years than they've been in past years. He talked about coverage teams. He talked about how he believes Daniel Whalen's one of the best punters in the NFL, and he did mention Brandon McManus And he was asked specifically about McManus because obviously he had the 2 missed field goals and a missed extra point in the playoff loss to Chicago. And Goody had mentioned his steadfast belief that Brandon McManus is going to be just fine. He said one of the reasons, they went out and got McManus last year was because of his numbers kicking in sort of adverse weather conditions, although it was pretty bad, obviously, against Chicago. And, the whole operation looked fine up until McManus kicked it. But Goody mentioned, hey, he made 32 straight kicks before the struggles, and did mention he expects to bring in competition at kicker, but said it's status quo. I'm paraphrasing here, but Goody said the competition they'll bring in at kicker is status quo. It's something they do every offseason, and it has nothing to do with how McManus performed against Chicago or at certain junctures throughout the season. And so special teams sounds like it'll stay the same. I don't remember there being a question about Stenovich, but obviously assuming he's back at this point, are there any offensive coordinator positions left available? I don't know if there are. He called Josh Jacobs a warrior for what he played through last season. There have been some people suggesting get rid of Josh Jacobs, don't bring him back. I'm certainly not in that camp. I love Emmanuel Wilson. I wish Marshawn Lloyd was healthy for any amount of time. We haven't seen that yet, and he was a third-round pick a couple years ago. I like the depth they have at running back, and I would expect Lloyd to be back, even though you can't bank in on him with the injuries we've seen the first couple of years, and maybe get Emmanuel Wilson back too. I don't see the logic in moving on from Josh Jacobs. I know year 2 Josh Jacobs was not the same as year 1 that we saw in Green Bay, but clearly he was going through it at times, and I believe he's way too important a piece of the puzzle for the offense that I don't see the lot. When we talk about cap casualties and people are bringing up names like Rashawn Gary, Elton Jenkins, you'd love to keep everyone around, but I can see the case being made for names like that. When people bring up Josh Jacobs, I can't put that together to the point where I'm yeah, get rid of Josh. No, bring back Josh Jacobs. And it sounds like that will certainly be the case, although Goody didn't say with 100% certainty. He praised Jordan Love. That shouldn't be a surprise. And said he believes Jordan Love will get even better and better. Said he thought he was one of the best players down the stretch run of the season. I'm trying to figure out, or I'm just scrolling through my notes that I took. I took some on my phone too, so let's look here. But the main premise I took away from all of this, Rashawn, cornerback room, special teams, McManus. Yeah, is Green Bay's going to run it back. If they have their path to go down, based off what he said about specific players on the roster, the staff, all that, they want to run it back. And you can take that one of two ways. If you want to view it through the lens of you're running it back with a team that just lost 5 games to end the season, finished the season with the same amount of wins as the Minnesota Vikings. And the only reason I bring that up is because the Vikings, for so much of the season, were a complete and utter disaster, only to finish with 9 wins, the same amount as Green Bay. And so if you view it through the lens of, because I thought the messaging was clear, not directly, but with all of Goody's answers, or most of them, 95% of them, is that Green Bay's just going to run it back, and they believe they have enough to do that. And there's been signs with that. Matt LaFleur gets an extension. Goody gets an extension. Russ Ball gets an extension. And then the questions he answers with specific players at this presser. That was my takeaway. But if you view it through the lens of how are you choosing to just sit back and run it back for a team that backed into the playoffs again, 3rd straight season as the 7 seed, one and done, in brutal fashion after leading 21-3 at the half and 21-6 entering the 4th against the Chicago Bears. How are you choosing to run it back and not be more aggressive? Whether it's free agency, that'll be harder to navigate the draft, or, he said there aren't going to be wholesale changes at cornerback. Maybe wholesale changes somewhere like cornerback or at cornerback would have had people buying into the message more. But if you view it through that lens, I get it. You can also view it from the opposite angle of, look, this team was 9-3-1, leading Denver in the second half by 2 possessions with the ball, and held Denver very well may be playing this game on Sunday if Bo Nix doesn't get injured at the end of the win over Buffalo, and then they have to start Jarrett Stidham in the AFC Championship. And Green Bay was leading that team by 2 possessions. I know they lost the game, but you can look at it through the lens of Green Bay was 9-3-1. The world was its oyster. And then Micah Parsons goes down. And this came after Tucker Kraft had already torn his ACL. This came after Elton Jenkins had already broken his leg and was ruled out for the season. This came, when was Devontae Wyatt hurt? But you lost Devontae Wyatt at some point for the rest of the season. Like, the injuries were piling up, and they do for a lot of teams. But the significance of the names that were dealing with season-ending injuries, you're talking about Tucker Kraft, who was pacing to be damn near an all-pro at tight end. You're talking about Micah Parsons, it goes without saying, his impact. You're talking about Elton Jenkins, your all-pro caliber lineman who was making the shift to center. You're talking about Zach Tom at right tackle, who seemed like he was never healthy after the first couple weeks and was trying to fight through it. And it was admirable that Zach Tom was trying to do that, but he missed a large chunk of the season. And I'm not making an excuse for Green Bay. I'm just saying Goody's indirect message of Green Bay's going to run it back. There's a lot of people that will be fine with it, and it's justifiable because look at what this team was coming down the stretch before those 5 losses to finish the season, and look at the players that they had to try to fill the shoes of in their absences, season-long absences once those injuries were sustained to guys like Kraft, Parsons, Wyatt, Jenkins. I know I'm missing some names too, like Nate Hobbs obviously eventually was ruled out for the season. And it was a lot for Green Bay to try to overcome, and ultimately, obviously, it couldn't. And so there's 2 clear paths you can take if you're a Packers fan listening to what Goody said in this presser. It's, how the heck is this a status quo situation when you lost 5 in a row to end the season? Or it's, everything looked really damn good until the injuries came crashing down in such a catastrophic fashion for the Packers that you bring back Kraft, you bring back Devontae Wyatt, you bring back Micah Parsons and some of these other names that dealt with these injuries, Zach Tom. And those are almost like additions just because you didn't have them for the stretch run of the season. You can sit on either side. I'm fine with whatever route people take. I'm just here to be the messenger with how I viewed Brian Gutekunst presser today. Sounds like a lot of the names, faces are going to be familiar once coming back. End of the day, a bit of a roll of the dice, but not like a huge gamble. But I would expect or hope that there's some true depth added at cornerback, that if they bring back Rashawn Gary, it's not at his current number. Like, there's little things I want tinkered with in those categories and in those departments, but we'll see how it plays out. Let me know what you guys and gals think. I'm always appreciative of all the support. It is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. We'll see you next time.